For 10 long years, Ethan Cole had lived with nothing but the wind, the cattle, and the wide Wyoming silence for company. His ranch sat miles from the nearest town, tucked between rolling plains and a dark line of pines that marked the start of the wilderness. He had grown used to the quiet. He woke with the sun, cooked simple meals, fixed whatever needed fixing, and rode out to check the far fences. Some days he didn't hear another human voice. He told himself that the solitude suited him. It kept life simple, predictable, steady, things the world rarely offered anymore. On a late autumn evening, as clouds gathered thick and grey, Ethan sensed a storm before it even touched the land. The air grew heavy, and the horses grew restless. He hurried through his chores, tightening ropes, checking latches, and making sure every animal had shelter. When the first cold drops of rain slapped against his hat, he glanced toward the distant hills. Lightning cracked open the sky, followed by a rumble that seemed to shake the ground. He was almost done for the night when he noticed movement far beyond the fence line. At first he thought it was just a trick of the storm, branches bending, shadows shifting, but the shape kept coming, stumbling and swaying through the sheets of rain. Ethan narrowed his eyes. It looked like a person. Whoever it was, they were alone, soaked and barely upright. As the figure drew closer, he saw the strange flash of white fabric dragging through the mud. A dress, a veil, a person dressed for a wedding, yet wandering through a storm miles from any road. Before Ethan could call out, the figure reached his porch, steps slowing until the person collapsed completely. Ethan rushed forward, rain soaking through his shirt, and knelt beside the fallen stranger. It was a young woman, trembling violently from cold, her clothes clinging to her like a second skin. Mud streaked the hem of her dress, and her hands were scraped as if she had fallen several times. Ethan didn't waste a second. He lifted her carefully and carried her inside his house, keeping his voice calm as he tried to reassure her. She barely managed to whisper 2 shaky words before losing consciousness again, words that made Ethan freeze in place. "They're coming." He didn't know who she was, why she was dressed like a bride, or who she feared so much. But as the wind howled outside and rain hammered the windows, Ethan understood one thing clearly. After 10 quiet years, his life was no longer the same. Morning came slowly over the ranch, spreading pale gold across the wet fields and broken clouds. Inside the small wooden house, the air was warm from the stove Ethan had kept burning all night. The young woman he had rescued was still asleep, wrapped in blankets and breathing more steadily than she had the night before. Ethan kept quiet as he moved around the kitchen, boiling water and checking on her every few minutes. He didn't know who she was, but he did know that someone terrified, enough to collapse at a stranger's. Porch needed space to recover before answering questions. When she finally woke, her eyes opened in a quick, startled blink, as if she had forgotten where she was. Ethan stepped back to give her room. She looked around the small cabin, wooden walls, shelves of tools, the stove's warm glow, and seemed to relax just a little. Ethan offered her a cup of warm broth and waited patiently. After a long silence, she finally began to speak. Her name was Lena Ward. Her voice shook, not just from fatigue, but from everything she had been holding inside. She explained that she was not actually a bride. The dress she wore was part of her work as a costume tailor in a nearby town. She had been helping transport supplies and clothing to another settlement when her group was attacked. Bandits had ambushed them on a mountain trail, scattering everyone in different directions. Lena had grabbed the dress only because it was the closest warm thing when she fled. It was never meant to be worn like this, muddy, torn, and soaked by the storm. Ethan listened closely, letting her talk at her own pace. The more she spoke, the clearer it became how long she had been running. She had lost her horse, her supplies, and even her sense of direction. She didn't know how far she had walked, only that she had kept moving because stopping felt too dangerous. When the storm hit, she had been certain she wouldn't make it much farther. Seeing the faint lights of Ethan's ranch house was the last thing she remembered before blacking out. Once Ethan stepped outside to ready the horses for a trip back to town, he noticed boot prints, fresh, sharp, and leading from the hills. They hadn't been there the day before. Someone else had been close to the ranch, and they weren't wandering aimlessly. They were searching. The unease in Lena's voice suddenly felt more real. Whatever trouble she had escaped from wasn't finished yet. Ethan followed the boot prints slowly, keeping his steps light on the damp ground. The storm had softened the earth, making every track clearer than usual. 2 sets of prints, maybe 3, had come down from the ridge during the night. They weren't the kind of marks left by travelers passing through. These steps were purposeful, angled toward the house, stopping at several points as if the men had paused to watch. A chill ran through Ethan despite the rising sun. Whoever they were, they had dared come close enough to study the ranch before, disappearing back into the hills. When Ethan returned to the house, Lena was sitting up, her hands wrapped around another cup of broth. She looked stronger but far from calm. She noticed Ethan's expression before he spoke and set the cup down carefully. Her voice was quiet but steady when she guessed the truth. The bandits had followed her trail. She explained more of what had happened during the ambush. The group she had been traveling with carried valuable supplies, food, tools, fabrics, and the bandits believed someone in the group knew where extra goods were hidden. Lena didn't, but fear made the bandits unreasonable. They had chased any survivor who might know something, refusing to let their target slip away. The reality settled heavily between them. Ethan wasn't the sort to panic, but he also wasn't foolish. He began checking the doors, securing windows, and preparing anything that might be useful if the strangers returned. Lena insisted on helping. Though she was still recovering, she handled tasks with quiet determination, stitching old saddle straps, repairing torn leather, and organizing tools with practiced hands. Her calm focus made Ethan realize she had more resilience than she allowed herself to believe. As daylight stretched across the plains, the ranch took on a tense stillness. Every sound, rustling branches, distant horse calls, the creak of old boards, felt sharper than usual. Lena paused often to glance toward the windows, as if expecting a shadow to appear. Ethan did the same without admitting it aloud. Near sunset, dust began to rise on the horizon. At first it was faint, a thin haze drifting upward in the cooling air. But soon it thickened into clear trails, 3 riders moving in a line, heading straight toward the ranch. Ethan stepped onto the same porch where Lena had collapsed days earlier. The peace he had lived in for 10 years seemed far away now, replaced by a quiet resolve. Inside the house, Lena stood near the doorway, her expression tense but no longer helpless. Whatever was coming, they would face it together, not as strangers anymore, but as people who had found strength in each other when danger pressed close.